"Be quiet," said the homeless man to the police officer. "He discovers something no one should see." Michael Johnson felt his heart race as the man's dirty, trembling hand forcefully covered his mouth. It was his second week doing night patrol in the Hope District neighborhood of New York City, and nothing had prepared the 26-year-old police officer for that moment. "Be quiet, for God's sake," whispered the homeless man, his dark eyes full of panic. "If they find out you're here, it'll be the end for both of us." Michael tried to pull away, but the man yanked him more firmly behind the dumpster, discreetly pointing toward the abandoned building across the street. The officer followed his gaze and saw faint lights flickering in one of the second-floor windows. Something was happening there, something that clearly terrified this homeless man. "Who are they?" asked Michael quietly, feeling a mix of curiosity and tension. The man hesitated, looking around before answering. His grey hair was disheveled, and his torn clothes told the story of someone who had lost everything in life. Even so, there was something in his eyes that Michael recognized, a dignity he couldn't quite place. "My name is Robert Wilson," said the homeless man, finally relaxing the hand that covered the officer's mouth. "I've lived in this alley for almost 10 years, and 3 months ago I started noticing strange movements in that building." Michael adjusted his cap and took a better look at the man in front of him. Robert must have been around 50, but life on the streets had aged him prematurely. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not just from the cold, but from nerves. "What kind of movements?" asked the officer, beginning to understand that this wasn't just the paranoia of someone in a vulnerable situation. "People coming and going in the middle of the night. Always the same people, and always carrying large boxes." Robert gestured with his hands, showing the size. "But that's not what scares me." The sound of a door slamming in the abandoned building made both of them crouch lower behind the dumpster. Michael felt his breathing quicken. In his 2 years of police training, he had learned about investigation, but nothing about dealing with unlikely informants in dark alleys. "What else did you see?" insisted Michael, sensing that Robert was struggling against fear to share something important. 2 weeks ago, I was sleeping here when I heard screams." Robert pointed to a piece of dirty cardboard that served as his bed. They weren't screams of pain. They were screams of despair, as if someone was begging for help. Michael frowned. His experience was still limited, but he knew he should take this seriously. Robert didn't seem to be making up stories. There was something genuine about his fear. "Why didn't you go to the police before?" asked the young officer. Robert gave a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Do you think anyone would have believed me? A homeless man reporting strange things?" He paused, looking directly into Michael's eyes. "Besides, I recognized one of the people who frequent that place. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing." Robert's revelation made Michael even more interested. There was something in the way the man spoke that suggested personal knowledge of the situation. "Who did you recognize?" asked Michael, feeling he was about to discover something important. Robert hesitated again, as if weighing the risks of revealing that information. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Sarah Miller. She was a nurse at Mercy General Hospital until 5 years ago," said Robert, his voice heavy with a sadness Michael couldn't comprehend. "She was fired for irregularities." The name meant nothing to Michael, but the way Robert said it suggested a complex personal history. "How do you know her?" asked the officer. "She took care of my mother in her final days." Robert looked down, clearly struggling with difficult emotions. "My mother, Mrs. Margaret, was hospitalized with pneumonia. Sarah was the nurse on night duty." Michael began to understand this wasn't just an anonymous tip. Robert had personal reasons to be concerned about the activities in the abandoned building. "What happened to your mother?" asked Michael more gently. "She passed away in the early hours." Robert wiped his eyes with the backs of his dirty hands. "Sarah was on duty that night. After that, they discovered she was diverting medication from patients. Painkillers, sedatives, things like that." The information began forming a worrying picture in Michael's mind. A former nurse fired for diverting medication, now frequenting an abandoned building with suspicious activities during the early hours. "Robert," "Are you sure it was her?" asked Michael. "Yes. I'd recognize that woman anywhere." Robert discreetly pointed toward the building. "She has a scar on her face here." He drew a line from temple to cheek. "She got that mark years ago when she tried to stop a robbery. It was even in the news back then." Michael observed the windows of the abandoned building. The lights were still flickering faintly, indicating there was activity inside. His mind worked quickly, trying to decide the best course of action. "Robert, you said this has been happening for 3 months. Why did you decide to tell me today?" asked the officer. The man took a deep breath before answering, as if gathering courage to reveal something even more important. "Because today I saw her carrying a child," said Robert, his voice almost a whisper. "A little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and the child wasn't conscious." The revelation made Michael's blood run cold. That completely changed the nature of the situation. This was no longer just about suspicious activities, but potentially something much more serious. "Are you sure of what you saw?" asked Michael, trying to stay calm. "Absolutely," Robert nodded firmly. "I was hiding right here when she passed by, carrying the girl. The child was completely limp, as if in a very deep sleep. But it wasn't a normal sleep." Michael felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. His first reaction was to call for backup, but something in Robert's urgency made him hesitate. "There's one more thing," said Robert, interrupting the officer's thoughts. "I know that child." "What do you mean?" asked Michael, surprised. "She lives in this neighborhood. She's the daughter of Mrs. Thompson, who has a grocery store on the street above." Robert gestured in that direction. "The girl's name is Emma. She always passes by here in the morning on her way to school, and she always greets me." The situation was becoming increasingly complex and urgent. Michael needed to act, but knew he needed more information before making any hasty decisions. "Robert, did you see when she entered the building with the child?" asked the officer. "I did. It was about an hour ago." Robert checked a broken watch on his wrist. "But here's the problem. I also saw when the girl's mother came by here looking for her." The mother was searching. Michael felt the urgency increase. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson came by here shouting Emma's name, saying she hadn't come back from school." Robert shook his head. "I wanted to tell her what I saw, but how could I explain? A desperate mother wouldn't believe the words of a homeless man." Michael understood Robert's dilemma. The credibility of a homeless person in a situation like that would be questioned, especially if he accused a former healthcare professional of something so serious. "That's why you stopped me," said Michael, finally understanding the full situation. "Exactly," Robert nodded. "You're a police officer. You can do something. You can save that girl." Michael looked again at the abandoned building. The lights were still on, but there was no sign of movement in the windows. He needed to make a quick decision, but he also needed to be smart about how to approach the situation. "Robert, show me exactly where you saw her enter," asked Michael. Robert pointed to a side door of the building, almost hidden between 2 pillars. It was an entrance Michael hadn't noticed during his previous rounds. "It's through there. They always use that entrance," said Robert. "And there's something strange. They always leave a lookout outside." "A lookout?" asked Michael. "Yes. A tall man, always dressed in black. He stays hidden there on that corner." Robert pointed to a strategic spot that allowed observation of the entire street. "But today he's not there." Michael analyzed the information. The absence of the lookout could be an opportunity, but it could also indicate that something different was happening that night. "Robert, have you seen how many people frequent that place?" asked the police officer. "Usually there are 3. Sarah, a man I don't recognize, and an older woman." Robert counted on his fingers. "But today there were more people. I saw at least 5 different people entering." The situation was becoming increasingly complex. Michael knew he couldn't act alone, but he also felt there was no time to follow all the bureaucratic protocols. "Robert, I need you to help me," said Michael, making a decision. "Do you know any other way to enter that building?" Robert thought for a moment, then nodded. "There's a back entrance. I used to sleep there when it rained heavily." He hesitated. "But it's dangerous. The floor is deteriorated and could collapse." "Can you show me the way?" asked Michael. "I can." "But I have one condition," said Robert, surprising the police officer. "What condition?" asked Michael. "I'm going with you." Robert stood up, showing a determination that contrasted with his fragile appearance. "That girl was always kind to me. I won't stay here while she needs help." Michael hesitated. Taking a civilian on an operation like that went against all the protocols he had learned. But Robert knew the place, knew the people involved, and more importantly, he was the only witness he had. "All right," agreed Michael. "But you do exactly what I say when I say it." "Understood." "Understood." Robert nodded firmly. The two men carefully emerged from behind the dumpster, walking in the shadows toward the back of the abandoned building. Michael felt adrenaline rushing through his veins, but also a strange feeling that that night would change his life forever. As they walked, Robert began to share more details about his life and how he had ended up on those streets. His story was painful, full of losses and bad decisions, but it also revealed a man who had maintained his humanity despite all the difficulties. "I haven't always lived on the streets," said Robert as they moved around the building. "I was an electronics technician. I had my own repair shop for televisions and radios." "What happened?" asked Michael, genuinely interested. "My wife got sick. Cancer." Robert paused, clearly struggling with difficult emotions. "I spent everything I had trying to pay for the treatment. I sold the workshop, sold our house, sold everything." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He had judged Robert initially, seeing only a homeless man. Now he was discovering the story of a man who had sacrificed everything for love. "And then?" asked Michael gently. "She passed away anyway." Robert wiped his eyes. "And I was left with nothing. No home, no job, no family. I started drinking to forget the pain, and before I knew it, I was on the streets." They reached the back of the building where Robert pointed to a low window that was partially open. "It's through here," said Robert, "but watch out for the floor inside. There are large holes that could be dangerous." Michael examined the entrance. It was risky, but it seemed to be the only way to reach the girl without alerting whoever was inside. "Robert, before we go in, I need to know, are you absolutely certain you saw the girl being taken?" asked Michael. "I am." Robert looked directly into the officer's eyes. "I know I don't seem trustworthy, but I swear on my wife's memory that I'm telling the truth." The sincerity in Robert's voice completely convinced Michael. He helped the older man through the window first, then followed him into the abandoned building. The interior was dark and smelled of mold. Michael turned on his flashlight on low mode, revealing a deteriorated environment with debris scattered across the floor. Robert carefully guided him through the obstacles, showing he knew the place well. "This way," whispered Robert, pointing to a staircase leading to the second floor. "The lights we saw are up there." As they carefully climbed the worn steps, Michael heard voices coming from above. He couldn't make out words, but the tone seemed tense, as if an argument was happening. "Robert, do you recognize these voices?" asked Michael in a whisper. Robert stopped to listen better, then nodded. "One of them is definitely Sarah's," he said. "The other I'm not sure about." They reached the second floor and saw light coming from a half-closed door at the end of the hallway. Michael gestured for Robert to stay behind him as they carefully approached. As they got closer, the voices became clearer. "I don't agree with this," said a female voice that Robert identified as Sarah's. "A child is different. This is going too far." "You knew what you were getting into when you agreed to participate," replied a male voice. "You can't have scruples now." Michael and Robert exchanged glances. It was clear that some kind of illegal operation was happening, and that Sarah was having second thoughts about involving a child. "The girl will wake up soon," said the male voice. "You need to administer another dose." "No," replied Sarah firmly. "She's already had too much sedative. More could be dangerous." "Then what do you suggest?" asked the man irritably. "Let her go. Say we found her lost on the street," suggested Sarah. "Are you crazy? She's seen all of us," said the man. "It's too late for that." Michael felt his blood boil. It was clear the girl was in real danger, and he needed to act quickly. He gestured for Robert to stay hidden as he moved closer to the door. Through the crack, he could see inside the room. There were 3 adults, a woman with a facial scar, who must be Sarah, a tall, thin man, and an older woman. In the corner of the room, lying on a makeshift mattress, was a small girl who appeared to be sleeping deeply. "Emma," whispered Robert behind him, confirming it was indeed the missing child. Michael needed to make a quick decision. It was 3 adults against him, and he didn't know if they were armed. His priority was the child's safety. He returned to where Robert was hidden. "Robert, I need you to do exactly what I'm going to ask," whispered Michael. "You're going to go back downstairs and leave the building. Then find the nearest patrol car and ask for backup. Say that Officer Michael Johnson needs urgent help at this address." "And you?" asked Robert, worried. "Robert, I'll stay here and make sure nothing happens to Emma until backup arrives," said Michael. Robert hesitated, clearly torn between following instructions and helping the officer. "Go," insisted Michael. "It's the best way to help the girl." Robert nodded and began to carefully move away. Michael turned his attention back to the room where the child was being held. The voices continued arguing, and it became clear there was no consensus about what to do with Emma. Sarah seemed genuinely concerned about the girl's well-being, while the other 2 were more worried about covering their tracks. "We should have thought better before taking the child," said the older woman. "Now we're all in danger." "You're the one who said she had seen too much," retorted the man. "Now you want to play innocent?" Michael realized Emma had been taken because she had witnessed something she shouldn't have seen. This explained why she was being held there, but also indicated her situation was even more dangerous than he had imagined. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. While waiting for the backup Robert had gone to get, Michael continued observing the situation in the room. Emma began to stir slightly, signs that the sedative was wearing off. "She's waking up," said Sarah with a tone of relief in her voice. "Then give her more medicine," ordered the man. "I already said I won't do that." Sarah stood up, showing resistance. "Do you want to kill an innocent child?" "Innocent?" The man laughed bitterly. "She saw our entire operation. She saw the medications, saw our faces, heard our names. How do you call that innocent?" Michael began to understand the situation better. Emma had witnessed some kind of illegal operation involving medications, probably a scheme selling diverted prescription drugs. Sarah, as a former nurse, must have had easy access to certain types of medication. The girl began to moan softly, clearly starting to wake up. Michael knew he needed to act before the situation deteriorated further. He checked his equipment: handcuffs, baton, radio, and a gun he hoped he wouldn't need to use, 3 suspects, a sedated child, and an environment he didn't know well. These weren't the best conditions for police action. "Please let me take her home," begged Sarah. "She's just a child. We can say we found her lost." "And then?" asked the older woman. "Do you think she won't talk about what she saw? That she won't describe all of us?" "She's 6 years old," argued Sarah. "Who's going to believe what a 6-year-old has to say?" "I can't take that risk," said the man, his voice growing more threatening. "We've already invested too much in this operation to let a child ruin everything." Michael felt the situation was about to deteriorate rapidly. Emma was waking up, and the man seemed to be losing patience. He needed to act, even without backup. He positioned himself strategically beside the door, from where he could quickly enter the room. His hand went instinctively to the radio, but he realized using the equipment could alert the suspects. "Emma, sweetie, how are you feeling?" he heard Sarah say kindly. "I want my mommy," replied the girl in a weak, confused voice. "Where's my mommy?" "She's coming to get you, dear," lied Sarah. "You just need to stay quiet here a little while longer." "I want to go home," insisted Emma, her voice growing stronger as she fully awoke. Michael heard footsteps approaching the girl. Through the crack in the door, he saw the man heading toward Emma with a syringe in his hand. "No," said Sarah, stepping between the man and the child. "I won't let you do this." "Step aside," ordered the man. "No," Sarah held her ground. "That's enough. This has gone too far." Michael knew he couldn't wait any longer. Sarah was trying to protect Emma, but she was clearly outnumbered. He took a deep breath and prepared to spring into action. "Police!" shouted Michael, pushing the door open and entering the room with his weapon drawn. "Everyone on the floor now!" The reaction was immediate. The older woman screamed in fright. Sarah instinctively raised her hands, and the man dropped the syringe, raising his hands as well. "On the floor," repeated Michael firmly. "All of you, on the floor now." Emma, still confused from the sedative, began to cry at the commotion. Michael kept his weapon trained on the three adults while trying to calm the girl. "It's all right, Emma," said Michael in a calm voice. "I'm a police officer. I've come to take you to your mother." "I want my mother," cried the girl. "I know, sweetheart. You'll be with her soon," said Michael, without taking his eyes off the suspects. Sarah was the first to lie down on the floor, followed by the older woman. The man hesitated for a moment, looking toward the room's exits. "Don't try it," warned Michael. "There's nowhere to run." Finally, the man also lay down on the floor. Michael approached carefully, keeping his weapon aimed as he began to handcuff the suspects. "You have the right to remain silent," began Michael, reciting the legal rights as he applied the handcuffs. It was then he heard rapid footsteps on the stairs. His heart raced, thinking there might be more suspects in the building. He pointed his weapon at the door, prepared for anything. "Michael!" shouted Robert's voice. "It's back up!" Moments later, 3 police officers entered the room, led by a more experienced sergeant. "Situation under control," reported Michael. 3 suspects detained, 1 minor victim who needs medical attention. The sergeant quickly assessed the situation and took command. 2 of the officers took charge of the suspects, while the 3rd called an ambulance for Emma. "Good work, Johnson," said the sergeant. "But next time, call for backup before entering a situation like this alone." "Yes, sir," agreed Michael, knowing he had broken protocols, but also knowing he had saved a child's life. Robert appeared in the doorway, clearly relieved to see everything had ended well. "Is the girl all right?" he asked. "She is," replied Michael. "Thanks to you." Emma was taken to the hospital for medical evaluation, and her mother was notified. The 3 suspects were arrested and taken in for questioning. Michael and Robert went to the precinct to give their statements about the night's events. During the interrogation, the true extent of the criminal operation was revealed. Sarah, the man named Charles, and the older woman, Mrs. Reynolds, were involved in a scheme to divert and illegally sell controlled medications. Sarah had used her knowledge and contacts from her time working at the hospital to identify high-value medications that could be diverted. Charles was responsible for distribution and street sales, while Mrs. Reynolds provided a safe location for storage and distribution. Emma had witnessed one of the transactions by chance, when she was on her way home from school and decided to take a shortcut through the alley where Robert lived. She had seen Sarah handing a large box to Charles, and had recognized the former nurse from the hospital where her grandmother had been treated. The child, curious as all children are, had approached and asked what Sarah was doing there. In a panic, the criminals decided to take Emma to prevent her from telling what she had seen. During her testimony, Sarah revealed that she had regretted involving a child from the moment Charles suggested kidnapping her. She had agreed to participate in the scheme initially because she was going through financial difficulties after being fired from the hospital, but she had never imagined it would come to the point of harming an innocent child. "I didn't want to hurt the girl," said Sarah during the interrogation, with tears in her eyes. "When Charles said we needed to take her, I thought it would only be for a few hours until we figured out a solution. I never imagined he was willing to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Charles, on the other hand, showed less remorse. During his interrogation, it became clear that he saw Emma only as an obstacle that needed to be removed. His coldness toward the child's fate shocked even the most experienced investigators. Mrs. Reynolds revealed that she had gotten involved in the scheme because she needed money to care for her own granddaughter, who had health problems. She had lost her job as a cleaning assistant and was desperate for income. Meanwhile, Robert remained at the police station, providing important details about the months of observation he had conducted. His precise memory of the schedules, the people involved, and the activity patterns in the abandoned building was crucial for building a solid case against the accused. "Why did you never think of approaching the police before?" asked the lead investigator on the case. Robert hesitated before answering, clearly embarrassed. "Who would believe me?" he said. "I'm a homeless person. People see me and assume I'm crazy, that I make up stories to get attention. Besides, I was afraid of retaliation." "Afraid of retaliation?" asked the investigator. "Charles had threatened me once," revealed Robert. "About a month ago he saw me watching the building and said that if I told anyone anything, he would make sure I disappeared from the neighborhood." This revelation added another charge against Charles: witness intimidation. The case was becoming increasingly solid. 3 days later, Emma was discharged from the hospital. The doctors confirmed that she had been given a significant dose of sedative, but had not suffered any permanent harm. Her mother, Barbara, was extremely grateful to Michael and especially to Robert. Barbara sought out Robert in the alley where he lived to thank him personally. "Mr. Robert," she said with tears in her eyes, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for my daughter." Robert, visibly moved, shook his head. "I only did what any decent person would do," he said. "Emma has always been kind to me. She deserves to have a safe and happy life." Barbara looked around the alley where Robert lived, observing the poor conditions. "You can't keep living like this," she said. "Not after what you did for us." "I get by," said Robert with dignity. "You don't need to worry about me." "But I do worry," insisted Barbara. "You saved my daughter. Now it's my turn to help you." Barbara had spoken with other merchants in the neighborhood about Robert's situation. Many of them had been impressed by his courage and honesty in reporting the criminal scheme. "We talked and decided to offer you a job," said Barbara. "It's not much, but it's a start. You can work at my grocery store during the day, and I have a small room in the back where you can live." Robert was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with intense emotions. "I don't know what to say," he finally said. "Say yes," replied Barbara with a smile. "Everyone deserves a second chance." Meanwhile, Michael was dealing with the consequences of his actions that night. Although he had saved Emma and dismantled a criminal scheme, he had violated several protocols by entering the abandoned building alone. His immediate superior, Captain Roberts, had called him for a private conversation. "Johnson, you understand, I can't ignore the fact that you acted against direct orders," said the captain. "Yes, sir," replied Michael. "I understand." "At the same time," continued the captain, "you saved a child's life and dismantled a criminal operation that had been running for months. That can't be ignored either." Michael waited silently, not knowing what to expect. "You will receive an official reprimand for not following protocols," said the captain. "But you will also receive a commendation for bravery and dedication to duty. In the end, I'd say you came out ahead." "Thank you, sir," said Michael, relieved. "But Johnson," added the captain, "next time call for backup before entering a situation like that. You got lucky this time. Next time you might not." "Understood, sir," agreed Michael. 2 weeks later, Robert was already working at Barbara's produce stand. He had gotten a haircut, was bathing regularly, and was wearing clean clothes. The physical transformation was noticeable, but the emotional transformation was even more impressive. "How are you feeling?" asked Michael during a visit to the produce stand. "Different," replied Robert, arranging fruit on a shelf. "It had been so long since I felt useful, since I felt like I belonged somewhere." "And now?" asked Michael. "Now I feel like I have a purpose again," said Robert, smiling. "Barbara treats me like family. Emma always stops by to talk with me before going to school. I feel human again." Emma appeared at the produce stand at that moment on her way to school. "Hi, Uncle Robert," she said cheerfully. "Hi, Mr. Policeman." "Hi, Emma," both replied. "My teacher said I'm a heroine," said Emma, clearly proud. "She said I was very brave." "You were indeed very brave," agreed Michael, "but the real hero here is Uncle Robert." "Why?" asked Emma, curious. "Because he saved you," explained Michael. "He saw you were in danger and did what was right to help you." Emma looked at Robert with admiration. "Uncle Robert, you're my hero," she said, giving him a hug. Robert bent down to the girl's level and hugged her back, with tears in his eyes. "And you're my little heroine," he said. "Always be brave like you were that night, but also always ask for help when you need it." "I promise," said Emma. After Emma left for school, Robert and Michael continued talking. "You know what's funny?" said Robert. I spent years feeling invisible. People would walk past me on the street as if I didn't exist. But that night, when I saw Emma in danger, I felt more real than I had in years. How so? Asked Michael. Because I finally had a chance to make a difference in someone's life, explained Robert. All those years on the streets I felt like a burden to society, but that night I could be useful. I could help. Michael nodded, understanding what Robert meant. You know, Robert, I learned a lot from you that night, said Michael. What did you learn? Asked Robert, surprised. I learned that I shouldn't judge people by their appearance, said Michael. When I first saw you, my first reaction was distrust. But you've proven to be braver and more honest than many people I know. Robert smiled, clearly touched by the comment. And I learned that there are still good people in the world, said Robert. People like you, who are willing to listen and act when someone needs help. The two men continued working in silence for a few minutes, each reflecting on how their lives had changed after that night. Barbara appeared from the back of the store, carrying a box of bananas. Robert, can you help me with this? She asked. Of course, replied Robert, taking the box. Leave it to me. Michael observed the interaction between the two and smiled. It was evident that Robert had found not just a job, but a new family. Barbara, said Michael, may I ask how Emma is handling everything that happened? Surprisingly well, replied Barbara. She had some nightmares the first few nights, but now she seems back to normal. Children are more resilient than we imagine. And what does she remember from that night? Asked Michael. She remembers seeing the woman with the scar doing something strange in the alley, said Barbara. She remembers asking what was happening, and then remembers waking up confused in a dark place. Fortunately, she doesn't remember the scariest moments. That's good, said Michael, relieved. The psychologist said it's normal, added Barbara. Her brain protected her memory from the most traumatic moments. 3 months later, the trial of the 3 defendants was concluded. Sarah received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and the fact that she tried to protect Emma. Charles received the heaviest sentence, including charges of kidnapping, drug trafficking, and witness intimidation. Mrs. Reynolds received an intermediate sentence. Robert was called to testify during the trial. His transformed appearance and demeanor impressed everyone in the courtroom. He testified with clarity and precision, providing crucial details that helped convict the defendants. Are you certain that the 3 defendants were involved in the illegal operation? Asked the prosecutor. I am absolutely certain, replied Robert firmly. I observed them for months. I saw their activities, heard their conversations, and witnessed when they took the girl. And what motivated you to finally report these activities? Asked the prosecutor. Robert thought for a moment before answering. Seeing an innocent child in danger, he said. Emma was always kind to me, always greeted me when she passed through the alley. When I saw she was in danger because of these people, I knew I had to act. Even knowing it could put you at risk? Asked the prosecutor. Some risks are worth taking, replied Robert, especially when it comes to protecting a child. After the trial, Robert returned to his new life at the grocery store. He had become a respected figure in the neighborhood, known not only for his courage, but also for his honesty and dedication to work. Michael continued his rounds in the neighborhood, but now with a different perspective. He had learned to look beyond appearances and value the contributions of all community members. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, 6 months after the events of that fateful night, a special ceremony was organized at the police station to recognize Robert and Michael's contributions to community safety. Captain Roberts gave an emotional speech about how courage can come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the real heroes aren't the ones we expect, said the captain. They are ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when faced with difficult situations. Robert received a Civil Merit Medal of Honor, the first time in his life he was publicly recognized for something positive. Michael received a promotion and was transferred to a special investigation unit. Mr. Robert, said Emma during the ceremony, tugging on his shirt sleeve, are you going to keep working at my mum's grocery store? Yes, I am, little one, replied Robert, smiling. There's no place in the world I'd rather be. That's good, said Emma. Because you're the best banana seller in the whole world. Robert laughed, a genuine and happy laugh that echoed through the police station hall. A year later, Robert had become a minority partner in Barbara's grocery store. He had invested his savings in the business and was helping expand operations. The store now served not only the local neighborhood, but also made deliveries to other nearby areas. Michael had been promoted to detective and was working on more complex cases. He often stopped by the grocery store during his investigations, not just to buy fruit, but to consult Robert about suspicious activities in the neighborhood. "Robert has become our eyes and ears in the community," said Michael during an interview with the local newspaper. "He knows the neighborhood better than any police officer, and people trust him." "How has your life changed since that night?" the journalist asked Robert. "Completely," replied Robert. "I regained my dignity, my purpose, and most importantly, I regained my faith in humanity. And what is your message for other people who may be going through difficulties similar to yours?" asked the journalist. Robert thought carefully before answering. "Never give up on yourselves," he said. "No matter how low you've fallen, there's always a chance to rebuild. Sometimes all we need is an opportunity to show our true nature." "And for those who can help?" asked the journalist. "Don't judge by appearances," said Robert. "Every person has a story, has dignity, has potential. Sometimes the only thing separating someone from success is an opportunity and someone who believes in them." Emma, now 7 years old, had become a regular at the grocery store after school. She helped Robert organize the fruits and always shared stories about her day at school. "Uncle Robert," said Emma one afternoon, "my teacher said you're an example of how a person can change their life." "Your teacher is very wise," replied Robert. "But you know what I learned?" "What?" asked Emma, curious. "That sometimes it's not us who change our lives," said Robert. "Sometimes it's the people around us who give us the chance to show who we really are inside." "What do you mean?" asked Emma. "Well, I've always been the same person inside," explained Robert. "What changed was that people like your mother, and you, and Officer Michael gave me the opportunity to show my true nature." Emma nodded, trying to understand the deep concept Robert was sharing. "So you were always good inside?" she asked. "Always," confirmed Robert. "But sometimes when people go through very hard times, they forget how to be good. They need other people to remind them." "And we reminded you?" asked Emma. "You reminded me," said Robert, hugging the girl, "and I'm grateful for that every day." 2 years after that night that changed all their lives, Robert had become a respected figure not only in his neighborhood, but throughout the entire region. He often spoke in schools about the importance of not judging people by appearances, and about how small acts of kindness can transform lives. Michael Johnson had become a respected detective and often collaborated with community organizations to improve the relationship between the police and local residents. Emma was growing up to become a strong and courageous young woman, always willing to help others and never forgetting the lesson about looking beyond appearances. Barbara had expanded her business and now owned 3 grocery stores in the area, all managed with the help of Robert. On a sunny afternoon, the 4 of them gathered for a picnic at the local park. It was a tradition they had developed, a moment to reflect on how their lives had become so extraordinarily intertwined. "Can you believe it all started with a request to be quiet?" said Michael, smiling. "Sometimes the most important changes begin in the most unexpected moments," said Robert philosophically. "And sometimes the most unlikely people become our greatest blessings," added Barbara. Emma, now 9 years old, was playing nearby. She approached the group with a flower she had picked. "For you," she said, offering the flower, "because you are my chosen family." The 3 adults looked at each other, all touched by the simplicity and depth of the girl's words. "Chosen family," repeated Robert. "I like that." "That's what we are," agreed Barbara. "A family that found each other under the most unlikely circumstances, and that stayed together through love and mutual respect," added Michael. As the sun set over the park, the 4 remained seated together, each reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to that moment. Robert thought about how his life had gone from complete hopelessness to a happiness he never imagined possible again. Michael reflected on how that night had changed not only his career but his perspective on what it means to serve and protect. Barbara contemplated how a stranger's courage had saved her daughter, and in the process, enriched their lives in unimaginable ways. And Emma, though still young, intuitively felt that she was part of something special, a family formed not by blood, but by love, courage, and second chances. The story that began with a desperate whisper in the dark had turned into a celebration of the light people can bring into each other's lives. 5 years had passed since that fateful night. Robert was now the owner of half the grocery store chain and had become an informal counselor for people experiencing homelessness. He often visited shelters and recovery centers, sharing his story and offering hope to those who had lost faith. Michael had been promoted to chief investigator and led a unit specializing in crimes against children. His experience with Emma's case had shaped his approach to investigations, always remembering the importance of listening to all voices, regardless of their background. Barbara had become a community activist, working to improve living conditions in the neighborhood and promoting social reintegration programs. Her grocery store had become an informal community support center. Emma, now 11 years old, was a brilliant student who dreamed of becoming a social worker. She often accompanied Robert on his visits to shelters, helping to distribute food and talking with children in difficult situations. One Sunday morning, Robert received an unexpected call. It was Sarah, the former nurse who had been convicted for the events of that night. "Robert," said the hesitant voice on the other end of the line, "I know you have no reason to talk to me, but I needed to call you." Robert hesitated for a moment but decided to listen. "What do you want, Sarah?" he asked. "I wanted to apologize," said Sarah, her voice filled with emotion. "And I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" asked Robert, surprised. "Yes," said Sarah. "If you hadn't reported what was happening, if you hadn't had the courage to act, I would have continued down that dark path. Maybe I would have done even worse things." Robert listened silently, trying to process Sarah's words. "I served my sentence," continued Sarah, "and during all that time I thought about that night, about how I almost allowed an innocent child to be hurt because of my cowardice." "And now?" asked Robert. "Now I work as a volunteer at a recovery center for addicts," said Sarah. "I use my experience as a nurse to help people who are struggling with addictions. It's my way of trying to make up for the harm I caused." Robert was surprised by the sincerity in Sarah's voice. "I'm glad to hear you found a positive purpose," said Robert. "Robert, you saved more than Emma's life that night," said Sarah. "You saved my soul too. You showed me there was still time to do the right thing." After hanging up the phone, Robert reflected on the conversation. It was amazing how one single night, one single act of courage had created ripples that kept spreading years later. He shared the conversation with Barbara, Michael, and Emma during the Sunday lunch that had now become a tradition among them. "It's amazing how our actions can affect people in ways we can't even imagine," said Barbara, after hearing about Sarah's call. "That reminds me why I chose my career," said Michael. "It's not just about arresting criminals. It's about protecting people and sometimes even about giving second chances." "Uncle Robert," said Emma, "do you think everyone deserves a second chance?" Robert thought carefully before answering. "I think everyone deserves the opportunity to try to be better," he said, "but they have to genuinely want to change, and they have to be willing to work hard to repair the damage they caused." "Like you did?" asked Emma. "Like I did," confirmed Robert, "and like Sarah is doing now." "And like we all do every day," added Barbara, "because we all make mistakes. The difference is that some mistakes are bigger than others, but we all need the chance to grow and improve." Emma nodded, absorbing the wisdom from the adults around her. "I hope when I grow up I can help people like you do," she said. "You already do, little one," said Robert. "Your kindness and your ability to see the good in people helps more than you realize." That night, after Emma had gone to sleep, the three adults continued talking in Barbara's kitchen. "Can you believe all this really happened?" asked Barbara. "Sometimes I wake up and think it was all a dream." "It was real," said Michael. "And it continues to be real every day." "You know what I find most amazing," said Robert. "It's how a situation that started so terribly resulted in so much good." Maybe that's what life is, said Barbara. A series of moments where we can choose between fear and courage, between selfishness and compassion. And we chose courage and compassion, said Michael. And look where that brought us, said Robert, looking around Barbara's cozy kitchen, remembering the cold alley where he used to sleep. 10 years after that night that changed everything, a special ceremony was organized in the Hope District neighborhood. A square was being inaugurated and named in honor of Robert, recognizing his contributions to the community. Emma, now 16 years old and a young community leader, was invited to give the inauguration speech. "This square represents more than just a beautiful green space," said Emma to the gathered crowd. "It represents proof that one person can make a difference, that courage can come from anywhere, and that it's never too late to start over." Robert, now 60 years old, was sitting in the front row, visibly moved. Barbara was by his side, holding his hand, while Michael stood behind them, proud of the young woman Emma had become. "Uncle Robert taught me that true heroism isn't about being strong or brave all the time," continued Emma. "It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching." The crowd applauded, and Robert wiped tears from his eyes. "But more importantly," said Emma, "he taught me that every person has value, that everyone deserves dignity and respect, and that small acts of kindness can change the world." After the ceremony, the chosen family gathered in the square that now bore Robert's name. "Uncle Robert," said Emma, "how does it feel to have a square named after you?" Robert looked around the square, watching families playing, elderly people chatting on benches, children running freely. "I feel grateful," he said, "but more than that, I feel hopeful. This square will serve the community for decades. Children will play here, families will have picnics, people will meet and create memories. And whenever they look at the plaque with your name, they'll remember your story," said Barbara. "They'll remember that change is possible," added Michael. "They'll remember that heroes can come from anywhere," said Emma. Robert smiled, looking at the 3 people who had become his family. "No," he said, "they'll remember that when people come together, when they choose to care for one another, extraordinary things can happen." The sun was setting over the new square, creating a golden light that enveloped the gathered family. On the bench where they were sitting, a small plaque read, "In memory of all second chances, and in honor of all acts of quiet courage." Robert had learned that sometimes the deepest changes begin with a whisper in the dark, a desperate plea for silence that, paradoxically, ends up breaking years of silence about injustice and suffering. Michael had learned that being a police officer didn't just mean enforcing the law, but also listening to the voices that many prefer to ignore. Barbara had learned that opening her heart to help a stranger could result in unimaginable blessings for her own family. And Emma had learned that heroism has no age, no social status, and no specific appearance. Heroism is simply the willingness to do what's right, even when it's hard. As they walked home that evening, Robert stopped for a moment at the place where his old home in the alley used to be. It was now a small community garden where people planted flowers and vegetables. "Sometimes I come here to remember," Robert told the others. "Remember what?" asked Emma. "Remember where I came from," said Robert. "Not to feel bad, but to never forget that transformation is possible, and to never forget the importance of helping others who are where I was. And to remember that this is where it all began," said Michael. "Where our family was formed," added Barbara. "Where I learned that by asking for silence we sometimes find our voice," said Robert. End of story. And now, dear listeners, after following this moving journey of transformation and second chances, we want to know, what did you think of the story of Robert, Michael, Barbara, and Emma? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance like Robert had? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. Your company makes each narrative even more special.